Hare Krishna is one of the auspicious ritualistic activities which are offered in the Vedas as fruitive activities, Karma Kanda. 9. To instruct a faithless person about the glories of the holy name. 10. To not have complete faith in the chanting of the holy name and to maintain material attachments even after understanding so many instructions on this matter. It is also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee who claims to be a Vaishnava must guard against these offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success, Krishna Prema. Hare Krishna, I welcome all of you once again to this Bhakti Sangha conference call. So let us move on to our next session, that is Srimad Bhagavatam class. May I know who all are joining the call today?
Hare Krishna Mataji, Danvat Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Guru Maharaj ki jai. This is Arvindax Das from Chicago. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Arvindax Prabhuji, Dandavas Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Bhargavi Mataji, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Guru Maharaj. This is Kamadi Kedasi from Baltimore. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Kamadi Mataji, Dandavas Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you so much, Mataji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Bhargavi Mataji, Dandavat Pranam. Please accept my humble obeisances. All goes to Srila Prabhupada and Gurudev. This is Radharani Devi Dasi from Baltimore. Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Radharani Mataji, Dandavas Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you, Mataji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji, all glories to Srila Prabhupada and Gurudev. Dandavat Pranam to you and everybody join in the class. This is Hari Dada from Fairfax, Virginia, Washington. Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dandavas Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you, Mataji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Bhargavi Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Guru Maharajas, and all glories to the assembled devotees. This is Tiffany in Pennsylvania. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Tiffany Mataji, Dandavas Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you, Mataji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji, this is Kiran Goyal from Baltimore. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to Guru Maharaj, and all glories to all the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Goyal Mataji. Thank you so much, Mataji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and Guru and Gauranga and all assembled devotees. This is Megha from Naperville. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Neha Mataji, Dandavas Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you so much, Mataji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Bhargavi Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. This is Vinita Gandharvika Devidasi from Texas. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Vinita Gandharvika Mataji, Dandavas Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you so much, Mataji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Bhargavi Mataji, all glories to Srila Prabhupada and Guru Maharajis. My humble obeisances to you and all the devotees. This is Krishna Kumari Devidasi from Ram.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Kumari Mataji, Dandavas Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you so much, Mataji, for Bhakti Sangha call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Bhargavi Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Gurudev ki jai. Dandavat Pranam to all Vaishnava, Vrinda.
Hare Krishna, Vrinda Gopika Mataji, Dandavas Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you, Mataji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Bhargavi Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Guru Maharaj ki jai, Priti Dasi from Charlotte. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Priti Mataji, Dandavas Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you so much, Mataji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glories to Prabhupada, all glories to Guru Maharaj, all glories to Assembly devotee. This is Mohini Lakshmi from Detroit.
Hare Krishna, Mohini Lakshmi Mataji, Dandavas Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you, Mataji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Bhargavi Mataji, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and all the assembled devotees. This is Induleka Karuna Devi Dasi from Lincoln.
Hare Krishna, Induleka Karuna Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you so much, Mataji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada and Guru Maharaj. This is Varsha from Charlotte.
Hare Krishna Varsha Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you so much, Mataji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference call. Hare Krishna. Okay.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, Guru Maharaj and the assembled devotees. This is Shiromani Nandarani Devidasi from Krishna Kathadesh.
Hare Krishna Shiromani Nandarani Mataji, Dandavat Pranam, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you, Mataji, for joining Bhakti Sangha conference call. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Hare Krishna. Okay, I welcome all of you once again for joining today's Bhakti Sangha conference call. We are really fortunate to have His Grace Chaitanya Leela Prabhuji to enlighten us on Chaitanya Charan Prabhuji to enlighten us on the topic of Srimad Bhagavatam today. So, Prabhuji has yet to join. So before Prabhuji joins, I would like to hand over the call to Tiffany Mataji to give a brief introduction on Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
So sorry. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So today we have, Today we have His Grace Chaitanya Charan Prabhuji. Chaitanya Charan Prabhuji is a monk and spiritual mentor. He is also a spiritual author. He has been educated in electronics and telecommunications engineering from the Government College of Engineering in Pune. He subsequently served as a software engineer in a prominent multinational software corporation. And seeing the prevalent problems of stress, depression, addiction, and overall misdirection, all due to the lack of spirituality, he felt inspired to dedicate his life to the cause of sharing the spiritual wisdom of Bhagavad Gita. He travels all over the world, from Australia to America, giving spiritual talks on subjects in universities such as Princeton and Cambridge, and companies such as Intel and Microsoft. Prabhuji is the author of the world's only Gita Daily feature, wherein he writes a daily 300-word reflection on a verse from Bhagavad Gita. As of now, he has written over 1,700 Gita meditations that are posted on GitaDaily.com and are read through daily feeds by thousands from all over the world. He also answers questions by seekers on his site, thespiritualscientist.com, where his over 3,500 audio answers and several hundred articles are available. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Thank you. Thank you so much for the very brief introduction on Prabhuji. So
Mataji, Prabhuji has asked us to read the verse.
Oh, okay, Mataji. So we will go on reading the verse. Mataji, someone would like to read?
Indu Mataji.
Hare Krishna Mataji, Dandavat Pranam. So this is Srimad Bhagavatam. We are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 13, verse number 25. Savirapatir api sujana samavagata paramatma satatva atmanya avidyadhyaropitam cha dehatmamatim visasarja evam hi nripa bhagavat asritanubhava. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. After receiving lessons from the great devotee Jadabharata, King Rahugana of the state of Savira became completely aware of the constitutional position of the soul, He thus gave up the bodily conception completely. My dear king, whoever takes shelter of the servant of the Lord is certainly glorified, because he can, without difficulty, give up the bodily conception. Purport. As stated in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Leela, chapter 22, verse 54. Sadhu Sangha Sarva Shastra Kaya Lava Matra Sadhu Sange Sarva Siddhihaya. It is a fact that if one takes shelter of a pure devotee, one attains all perfection, even if the association is a short one. A sadhu is a pure devotee of the Lord. It has been our practical experience that the first instruction of our spiritual master infused us with Krishna consciousness, so that now we are at least on the path of Krishna consciousness and can understand the philosophy. As a result, there are many devotees engaged in this Krishna consciousness movement. The whole world is revolving under the bodily conception. Therefore, there must be devotees all over the world to deliver people from the false bodily conception and fully engage them in Krishna consciousness. Hare Krishna. I think Prabhuji has not joined yet. So Mataji.
Prabhuji has a connection problem, Mataji. That's why.
Okay, Mataji.
Yesterday also we saw.
I think Prabhuji joined. Thank you, Mataji.
Yeah.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Please accept our humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you, Prabhuji, for giving your valuable time and association in this Bhakti Sangha conference call. So today, we are really fortunate to hear from you, Prabhuji. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. We just read the verse and translation, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Am I audible to you?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Thank you. At the translation purport, is read or they have to be read still?
Everything.
So everything is done or to be done? Sorry, I didn't get you.
Done.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjali Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschyati Deshatarine Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyaiva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So sorry for the delay in joining. I hope my internet should work reasonably well now. So here we are continuing with our discussion on the 5th canto, the concluding part of the pastime of Jada Bharat and his interactions with Rahuguna. This has been a multi-life journey, and in this multi-life journey, what has been described is that how Jada Bharat started from as a king who renounced the world, became a deer, and then eventually he acted as an ignorant person, although he's very enlightened, having been born in a Brahminical family. But this, if a Jada person, the word Jada is very striking. Normally we have these two categories, Jada and Jada and Chetan. So Jada Bharat means one who was like unconscious almost. He was unresponsive, unconscious. But he actually had the highest consciousness. And how not only did he have the highest consciousness, but this verse explains how he elevated the king to the highest consciousness. So it says, Bhagavad Ashrit Ashritanubhavaha. So the Nrupa, the king, became the one who took shelter of the one who has taken shelter of Bhagavan. So it's interesting. Overall, this pastime has been more a lesson in detachment than in devotion. If we look overall, the focus has been much more on being detached from the world, being focused more on avoiding entanglement in the world. And if you look at the instruction that Jada Bharat gives to Maharaj Rahugana, there is not much mention of devotion to the Supreme Lord. There is a focus much more on detachment. But at the end, this significant point is coming. In this way, Bhagavad Ashrit Ashrita Anubhavaha. So if we consider from one perspective, this chapter broadly has, like I mentioned yesterday's verse we summarized broadly that there were 3 sections in this chapter. The first section was about how Jadabha describes the distresses in the forest of material existence. Then Rahugana appreciates Jadabha to enlighten him, and then there are the conclusions. So overall, in this description of the distresses, there is not much mention of devotion per se. But actually what is happening is there is a purpose for everything. So Paramatma Satatva. So the true Param Atma. Now Paramatma can refer to Paramatma, that is the super soul, or it can also refer to the soul who is transcendental. So Atma, who is Param. Param means not necessarily supreme. Param can also mean transcendental. So the word, the Satatva, in the Sanskrit, the word came over here. Sujan Samavagat Paramatma Satatva. So this is the knowledge that was given to him. Let's look at what is happening over here. Now, we'll look at some of the Sanskrit words in this verse, and then we will move forward and discuss. Now, here, Dehatma Matim Visasarja. So, at one level, what is happening in this section is that before we can understand that we should love Krishna, we need to understand what are the consequences of loving anything other than Krishna. So what the forest of material existence is doing is, it is giving us, in general, if we want to make a good choice, we need to have a vision of both the consequences of the bad choice and the consequences of the good choice. And when both are combined together, then there is a maximum impetus to make a healthy choice. So overall, now Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Sridhar Swami, they indicate that Rahugana was actually a devotee. He was going in a palanquin to hear Krishna Katha. But his Krishna Katha hearing was more like a ritual to be done. Just like in the previous canto, it's described that. So if we consider Rahugana over here, Rahugana's devotion was much more ritualistic than transcendental. So ritualistic means in this context that he was focused more on, yes, sometimes many people, they hear Bhagavad Katha. So there can even Bhagavatam can be heard, ritualistic hearing is possible. And it's a ritualistic hearing, what that means essentially is that a person is hearing primarily for the sake of, it's a cultural ritual. We have the same principle being talked about in the 4th canto. There is the 4th canto, there is the story of Prachini Barhi. Now Prachini Barhi is doing a religious activity. He's doing yagya. He's doing yagya, but he's doing the yagya for a religious, for a pious purpose, not a spiritual purpose. So now what is the difference between pious and spiritual? There's a lot of difference, but let's focus on some key points of difference. See, piety, the expected result is a better life in the material world. It could be in this life itself, but it could be it could be this life and in this world, or it could be in the next life, in the next world, which is actually the heavenly world. So whereas in spirituality, there is an understanding that better life in the spiritual world. Now that doesn't mean spirituality can't improve our life in this world. It can. It can make us more calm. It can make us more focused. It can help us to function more effectively in our day-to-day life. Definitely, it can improve our life in this world also. But that is not the primary purpose of spirituality. It's like a fringe benefit. Whereas in piety, the primary purpose is to elevate a person. So now, what will take a person from piety to spirituality? That means, oh, I do good in this world and I'll get good results in this world. And therefore, I'll do good. If I worship God, He'll keep my family life good. He'll keep my health good. He'll keep my financial situation good. So that is piety, more or less. So what will take a person from piety to spirituality? That is shock treatment. Shock treatment, which involves exposing the ultimate futility of piety. Now, when I say the ultimate futility, it's important to understand that this is not immediate futility. Immediate futility means, in general, we want people to live virtuously, to people to be God-fearing. Because if there's no fear of God, everybody will do whatever they want in their lives, and society will become chaotic. So not the immediate futility, the ultimate futility. What does ultimate futility of piety mean in this context? That is what is illustrated through this metaphor of the ultimate futility of piety. So that ultimately nothing works to make us happy at the material level. Some things may make us happier immediately. There's no denying that. But it's only short term. It is only short-lived. And when Prabhupada says, for example, there are categories in the 932 in BG Purport, Prabhupada talks about this, that how 932-33, they're together. Anityam asukham lokam imam prapya bhajasvamam. So this is the verse. This is something similar to dukkhale mashashvatam. Anityam asukham lokam. So exactly the same point. Anityam asukham, that is ashashvatam and dukkhalayam. Anityam asukham lokam, and the verse says imam prapya bhajasvamam. So therefore, having come to this world, Krishna is saying, worship me. So in that purport, Prabhupada says that categories such as wealthy and poor, or educated and, or say wealthy and poor, or attractive and unattractive. Attractive means materially having good looking form, and unattractive. They are ultimately inconsequential. Somebody might be wealthy and somebody might be poor, but both of them have to go through Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadhi. They're ultimately inconsequential. So this ultimate inconsequentiality means they don't have any positive consequence. This is forcefully illustrated through the metaphor of the forest of material existence. So what this means is that this metaphor is meant to convey that we may try many things in this world to become happy, but ultimately it is for us to recognize that these things, they may be of some use, no doubt about it. And if somebody is sick, they get a medicine, and that medicine relieves them from sickness, that's very good. And if it's not that the immediate solutions are to be neglected, but if that is all a person is doing, then it's a serious problem. So if that is, so the forest of material existence, in one sense, it's an extreme example, is when as recently, just in fact yesterday, one devotee asked me this question, that it seems to be a very, the description of family life seems to be extremely negative in this. Are all families like this? He said, I grew up in a family, my parents were quite happy with each other, they quarreled, but occasionally. And are all families like this, that everybody in the family is making each other miserable? And so I explained that this is a depiction not necessarily of what is universally happening everywhere, but this is a depiction of what is quite probable. So here we need to understand the three modes. Three modes shape everything in material existence. So what this means is that if a person, say, is living even in family life, for example, there is a description of how if a person is uncontrolled, they get angry about something and they lash out at their family members, they lash out at their spouse and children, and their children and spouse, they're unhappy with them, and their life makes them miserable. So if somebody is relatively speaking the mode of goodness, they will not lash out that way. So if we can consider what happens is, if you consider mode of ignorance, so there is one level is, there are basic problems of material existence are there for everyone. Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadhi, this is going to be there for everyone. No matter whether one is living in goodness, passion, ignorance, everybody has to die. Now, having said this, varieties can come from two different sources. One is, everyone has their individual karma to face. So because of this, so there is a common denominator of distress for everyone. So their individual karma to face means, here we are using the word karma in terms of reactions to past karma. So reactions to past karma means that if somebody has greater negative reactions to face, so therefore some people may have more distress than others. That's the second thing. We're talking about the distressful nature of material existence. So one is a basic level of distress for everyone. Within that, there are some people who may have greater karmic reactions to face, and that's why they may have greater distress. So for example, some people, when they are going through life, maybe they lose a spouse or they lose a child, or their whole life is filled with a lot of problems. So now we may say that problems come upon everyone, but we can say that some people have far more problems than others. So some people, they have children, their children may go through some difficult phases in their teenage, and they grow up and they become responsible. Some people, they may go through a lot of distresses. Sometimes they're not able to conceive, they have miscarriages, or the children die because of some sickness. So there are levels of distress in terms of some people may have greater suffering than others. And then there's a third part over here. Everyone creates further karma, or you could say here, people create further karma that may worsen their situation. So that means what? That if somebody doesn't act properly, there is a small conflict, and in a mode of ignorance, both people, say husband and wife, parent and children, or whoever it is, they make a small conflict very, very big. And the result of that is that the person suffers far, far more than what they need to. So both of them suffer far more because they make a small conflict very big. So they create further karma. So you could make an example, as they say, make a mountain out of a molehill. So why might this happen? This might happen because both of them are either too much in passion or in ignorance, and they see every conflict not this is an issue to deal with, but this issue will determine whether I am the superior person in the relationship or you're the superior person in the relationship. So they vest their whole identity on winning that particular battle. Their identity, their self-worth, their stature in that relationship all gets tied to one conflict. And that makes things far worse. So far worse. So now, if we consider what the Bhagavatam is doing in this particular passage, the forest of material existence, it is actually giving problems from all these three categories. Some problems are common to everyone. When we form relationships, sooner or later we will pass away, they will pass away. Hopefully we have a long, healthy life, productive life, and at the end of our life, in old age, we pass away. But so that is common denominator of distress for everyone. Now, some of us may have, so some of the sufferings which are described over there, they are because of particular karma that a person has. Now, in Bollywood, Hollywood, there is the idea that you may have a perfect partner. And if you can just find that perfect partner, your life will be wonderful. Now, actually, there is no such thing. The only perfect partner for the soul is Krishna. Now, having said that, it doesn't mean that there cannot be people who are more compatible with each other and they're completely or far less compatible with each other. So depending on that, sometimes two people come together, and if they're relatively compatible or they are mature enough to make themselves compatible, then the stress levels are much lesser. If not, the conflicts are very high. So they're just brought together, two incompatible people, they come together and there's distress. But the third category is something which we can minimize and avoid as much as possible. So overall, what has happened is this, yes, it is a very dark picture of the problems of material existence, and especially the problems of family life. And it's not necessary that every family has to be like this. But at the same time, in some ways, what the Bhagavatam is doing is that many people have a very rosy-eyed picture of what material life would be like. So just to jolt us out of complacency, the opposite of a rosy-eyed or a starry-eyed picture is a very stark picture. So the Bhagavatam, what it does is, it gives us the opposite picture. So we could say there's a default starry-eyed picture of material life, which we may get through movies or through our own mind's imagination or through novels, romantic novels or whatever. But this is the kind of picture that comes up for many people. And that is countered over here in the Bhagavatam by giving a very stark picture. Now, I'm not saying that this cannot happen. I've talked to and others that their lives have been far tougher than what has been described in the Bhagavatam also. There can be many problems. So a very stark picture, and that is given to jolt us out of our illusions, out of our illusory fantasies. So what is this purpose? The purpose is that stop making anything other than Krishna our supreme object of love. A supreme object of love. But that doesn't mean that we don't love anyone else. No, we love Krishna, and in the relationship with Krishna, we love our family members, we love our various other components of reality that may be there within us, but it's in relationship with Krishna. So it is described here, Rahugana becomes enlightened by hearing. So Paramatma Satatvam, he understands. But it is not said here that on understanding this, does Rahugana renounce the world and say to Jada Bharat, oh, you have opened my eyes. This whole material existence is miserable. Therefore, I will join you and I'll become a renunciate like this. He doesn't, that's not described in the Bhagavatam specifically. So Rahugana becomes enlightened, but doesn't necessarily take to the renounced order over here. So why is that? If he heard this and he heard how terrible life in the material conception can be, why did he not just renounce the world? Because the point is something much deeper. What is the point? That, so what is the solution to distressful material existence? First is to understand that yes, material existence is distressful. Now, once I understand that, what is the solution? It is not as simple as, okay, renounced order alone is not the solution. It is more, you could say, renunciation of worldly attachments is the solution. In the Bhagavad Gita, in the 2nd chapter, Krishna talks about how, not in the 2nd chapter, 6th chapter, he talks about that sannyasi yogi cha nanagri nachakriya. That who is a sannyasi, who is a yogi? He doesn't say that who is a renouncer. Krishna is giving a more of a, he's saying this person is a sannyasi and this person is also a yogi. And who is that? This is 6.1 and 2, he talks about it. Sa sannyasi cha yogi cha naniragni nachagriya. Yam sannyasam iti prahur. Yogam tamutyujyate. Na ya asanyasta sankalpo. Na ya asanyasta sankalpo yogi bhavati kasyana. So Krishna says, asanyasta sankalpo is giving up worldly desires. Sankalpa is, it's actually a little more than desires. Desire can be ichha. Sankalp is more like intentions, worldly intentions. So what happens is, the solution is not karma tyaga. It is not karma tyaga, it is kama tyaga. Not karma tyaga, but kama tyaga. What is the difference? Karma tyaga means, I think, oh, this world is a place of distress, so therefore I'll give up this world. Well, yes, the world is a place of distress. It is because we don't know how to live in the world. Because we think that the worldly objects are the source of pleasure for us. And that is how we become entangled. So karma tyaga, one might do that. But if one has not done kama tyaga, one has not given up worldly desires, the same mind will take the same mind to the forest. And in the 5th canto, in this very 5th canto, there is, it's actually, it's a fascinating study in the Bhagavatam. If you look at chapters as Lego units, if you look at the chapters of the Bhagavatam as Lego units, and then try to bring those Lego units together, like kids play with Lego units, you will see sometimes different chapters of the Bhagavatam seem to be saying significantly different things. And yet they are in the same book. And unless one gets the big picture, one will not be able to, okay, why is this different chapter saying different things? So what is this? What is the example of a Lego unit over here? If I consider the Bhagavatam as a, you could call it a Lego puzzle. That means you have a Lego unit. So if you see the 5th canto, approximately say from 5.6 to this 13, we have Bharat Maharaj pastime. And the overall import of this seems to be renunciation. No, in this world, even for the smallest of things, one may get entangled. Therefore, it is best to renounce the world and get out of this world. That seems to be the essential import of that chapter. But then, in this same canto, if you go to 5.1, there is the pastime of Priyavrat. And Priyavrat pastime says that renunciation is futile. So here, renunciation is the only way. That's what it seems we might infer by this. And Priyavrat not only wants to renounce, in one sense, is already renounced. But Brahmaji comes and tells him, no, you take up your responsibilities. And there he talks about how one may go into the forest, but one's senses, the five senses in the mind which one is taking, if they are obsessed with sense pleasure, then one is going to stay entangled despite being externally disentangled. So karma tyag is not the solution, kama tyag is the solution. And how does kama tyag happen? So why are there this? So are these two opposing lessons? So they're not opposing lessons, they are opposing approaches to the same solution. And that solution is bhakti. How are they opposing approach to the same solution? That if somebody thinks, so Priyavrat, he's thinking that renunciation is the solution. He says, no, renunciation is not the solution. It is devotional service that is the solution. And if your seniors, in this case Brahmaji, wants you to renounce the world, wants you to engage with the world, then that is what you should do. So in one sense, what is happening is the instruction is contextual. So for Priyavrat, he is taken from, you could say, superficial renunciation. I'm not saying his renunciation was superficial, but his idea that renounced order is the safer order. Why should I get in a word? From superficial denunciation to dedicated devotion engaged in the world. So that is what the Bhagavatam does for Priyavrat. Now, in contrast, what does the Bhagavatam do for, in this case, through Jad Bharat for Rahugana? There is, for him, superficial religiosity to dedicated, in this case, you could say superficial religiosity to detached devotion, again engaged in the world. Dedicated, detached devotion. Detached devotion, devotional engagement in the world. That means for him, so if we consider this is, say, the renounced order, this is the householder order. The point is, renounced order is not the solution, householder order is not the problem. Rather, it is devotion to the Lord that is the solution. So now, if for the sake of devotion to the Lord, somebody has to be told how renunciation itself is not of much use, that is what the Bhagavatam is doing. And then for him, it says that go from here to go back to the world, engage with the world. And that's how you will, by engaging in the mood of service, you will become elevated and you will become liberated. So that is one, it is from one pathway. So one who thinks that renunciation is a solution, no. So we could say karma and jnana. Now, it's not that exactly Priyavrat was a jnani or Rahugana was a karmi, exactly, but that is the broad understanding. That somebody thinks renunciation is the solution, no. It is dedicated devotional engagement that is the solution. And if that has to be done in the world as a service, do it do it in the world. And Rahugana is thinking, I'm a good person. See, it's very significant. Although Rahugana was harsh to Jad Bharat, Rahugana is not described as a villain in any way. He's also a king, and he's relatively speaking a virtuous king. One has to have some level of virtue to even understand when Jad Bharat gives some philosophical instructions to him. So what's happening is that he is coming back. He's coming toward the Lord from superficial religiosity. He's getting instructed. So to highlight the problems with superficial religiosity and the material prosperity that might result from it, the forest of material existence, that whole metaphor, the elaborate description is given like a shock treatment. So if one absolutizes this and says, this is how all materialistic life is, and what is the solution? Just renounce the world. No, renouncing the world is not the solution. Renouncing worldly desires is the solution. Now we may say, aren't the two very related? If I renounce the world, won't I renounce the worldly desires? Not necessarily. Now, each of us has to find out the best process by which we can grow in our devotion to the Lord. And for all of us, I'll conclude with this slide. For all of us, there may be different ways in which we may renounce the world. What that means is that focus is on devotional growth. We want to grow devotionally. For different people, different situations may be best suited for devotional growth. So devotional growth, so we have to find the situation where we can do we can do service in the most harmonious way for us. So that means harmonious way for us means for our own body mind machine, for our family, for our community. How can we contribute in the most harmonious way? Once we understand this, then we can move forward. So the Bhagavatam is, its focus is not on condemning materialistic life, nor is it on glorifying renunciation alone, because the Bhagavatam also has pastimes where we will see the exact opposite. Ambarish Maharaj and Durvasa Muni. Durvasa Muni is a person in a renounced order, and Ambarish Maharaj is a grahastha. But Ambarish Maharaj is a far greater devotee, and therefore he is considered far greater. So we have to find out what is the best way I can grow devotionally. And it is not necessary that simply renouncing the world will automatically lead to devotional growth. Why not? You may say, if I renounce the world, then I have no worldly responsibilities, I have no worldly distractions, I can focus much more on Krishna directly. Well, can we really? When we have 100 other things to do, we may say, the time when I get to hear the Bhagavatam, I can get to do some kirtans, I love it so much. But tomorrow, if we have nothing else to do, and somebody tells us, okay, chant 64 rounds every day, or do 8 hours of kirtan every day, or study about 8 hours Bhagavatam every day, very few of us will be able to do that. And for most of us, and I can talk as a person who has been a brahmachari for 20-25 years, and I've talked with many brahmacharis and sannyasis, very few of us, even us, can actually engage in just the core devotional activities constantly. And of course, in one sense, Prabhupada didn't even want us to do that alone. Prabhupada wanted us to engage with the world, to elevate the world. So we all need to, so the focus has to be on absorbing engagement. We will grow not just by renouncing the world, but by engagement that absorbs us. Absorbing engagement is the fuel for our devotional growth. The more we have some solid service, the more we'll be absorbed in Krishna, the more we will be able to actually implement the devotional principle of Smartavya Satatam Vishnu, Smartavya na Jatuchit. So that absorbing engagement is the most important thing for a devotee. And even if somebody says, okay, I want to renounce the world, well, first find absorbing engagement. And once we get absorbed in the engagement that way, then when we renounce the world, we won't find ourselves in a vacuum. What should I do after that? No, I have so much service to do that I want to cut down on my material life. Not that I cut down on material life and then try to find out what service can I do. And then now there is no service, I'm getting bored. And then what happens is, even devotees can get into prajalpa and gossip and spending time on so-called devotee social media, where we talk about this devotee did this and that devotee did that, and so many things can come up. So for us, wherever we are, that we need to become absorbed in devotion. And the metaphor of the forest of material existence, it is meant to, so the forest metaphor, it is meant to do what? It is to be an impetus for devotional absorption. That, there are many things in this world which promise pleasure, but they will promise pleasure and they will give me trouble. So I don't want to get allured by them. I want to focus and become absorbed in Krishna. It doesn't have to be not an impetus for renouncing the world itself. So Rahugana didn't do that, and we also don't have to have that kind of completely nihilistic view where we reject materialistic life and or rather we reject family life, grahastha life entirely, or condemn it. But rather we say, yes, even whichever ashram I am in, I need to understand that the ultimate source of shelter, the ultimate source of satisfaction, the ultimate source of meaning is Krishna. And to the extent I focus on Krishna, to that extent I can find peace and joy in my life. And to the extent I get diverted from it, then to that extent I will bring misery upon myself. So going back to those three categories of misery, I talked about miseries that are common to material existence. Miseries that are common to material existence, miseries that come because of our past karma, and miseries that come because of our present karma. So if we become serious in bhakti, at the very least we can say is we will prevent these miseries. The miseries that come because of misdirection of our desires, misdirection of our actions. So we can be engaged in the world, we can be doing our responsibilities in the world, but if we don't think that I'm working at a job, I'm getting money, and money will be my ultimate shelter. If I'm thinking like that, then if I lose money, it will be devastating. Well, if I understand, yes, money is important in the world, and I will use it in Krishna's service, and I'll use it responsibly. So even if there's some financial upheavals, we won't be affected that much because we are not conceiving of money as our ultimate shelter. It is a tool. It's an important tool. We'll use it. So similarly with everything else in material life. So when we are serious in bhakti, we won't replace Krishna with anything else as a source of shelter or satisfaction in our life. That's how these miseries will definitely be minimized. And then the second category of miseries that are there, that we have our karma and we have to go through that karma. Now Krishna says, the Brahma Samhita says, karmani nirdhati kintu ja bhakti bhajam. Now which karma will be burnt, how, we don't know that. But overall, we understand the principle that if distresses are coming to us despite our practice of bhakti, that doesn't necessarily mean that bhakti is not working or a karma is not getting burnt. Rather, it is Krishna doing what it takes. Krishna takes our karma and then uses it in such a way that it can inspire us to grow devotionally. So we don't demand that our karma be removed by Krishna, but rather we understand that even if some karma is coming to me, it's probably been minimized by Krishna. Probably I deserved much more, but Krishna has given me just a sample. So Krishna actually protects us from this. And as far as the first basic level of distress of material existence is concerned, these are unavoidable at one level. But what will happen by the practice of bhakti is that if we are not invested in bodily consciousness so much and pleasures coming from bodily consciousness, then we will not suffer that much. If my body is my sole source of pleasure, then I grow old and then my body just doesn't function. The misery will be far greater for me. On the other hand, if I have used my body to try to engage in the service of Krishna, and then even if I grow old, I can still hear about Krishna, I can still chant to some extent. And in that way, what we can do is we can tolerate and transcend the miseries that may come. Even for a devotee, death is not as much of a suffering, because generally death is a suffering because we are going away from everything that is dear to us. Not only by going away, we are being pulled away. But if a devotee has developed love for Krishna, then the devotee is not going away from the things that are dear to them. The devotee is also going toward the Lord who is most dear to them. So in that sense, the sufferings of death are also minimized. So I'll just summarize these three. I'll just mention these 3 points once again. So how bhakti deals with life's distresses. So we could say the most sure is our self-created distresses because of our misdirected actions. Because of our misdirected actions, these are almost eliminated. Because a devotee, if a devotee is convinced that the worldly things cannot give me pleasure, so a devotee won't get involved in so many things which bring so much trouble. Smoking, drinking, various forms of addictive behaviors, and the amount of suffering that comes from them is huge. That itself is almost entirely eliminated. Our past karma's reactions, what happens to them is they are minimized by Krishna's grace. And the inevitable distresses of material existence that are there, we learn to tolerate and transcend them by our absorption in Krishna and our decreased bodily consciousness. So in this way, actually speaking, what happens is the way out of the forest of material existence is not simply renouncing the world, but the way out of the forest of material existence is by increased devotional absorption in Krishna and finding out ways wherever we are to increase our devotional absorption. So I'll summarize what I discussed today. I started by talking about first, we discussed in this conclusion of the pastime of Rahugana, of Jad Bharat and Rahugana, and the theme was that Rahugana gets the knowledge of Paramatma Satatvam and Bhagavad Ashrita Ashritanam. In this way, he takes shelter of the one who is told to take shelter of Bhagavan. It's significant that in this chapter, Jad Bharat is not breaking out in rhapsodic praises of Bhagavan. He's thinking in a very sober way about the distresses and the traps of material existence. So why bring in Bhagavan suddenly toward the end when Bhagavan is not that prominent throughout this anecdote? So we discussed that in broadly three parts. That is this description of the forest of material existence very dark, very inordinately pessimistic about material existence? Well, not exactly. It is yes and no. So these are possibilities. Life can be even darker than this. But this is like a shock treatment for somebody who is thinking that by piety I'll be happy. So there's a shock treatment to get them from piety to spirituality by exposing the ultimate futility of piety. That even if I live a good life, materially good life in this world, it still distresses will come upon us. And I talk about three categories of distresses: inevitable distress of material existence, old age, disease, death, rebirth; the distresses due to our past karmas reactions; and third is distresses due to our own present karma. So the first category is almost unavoidable. The second is variable. Some of us may have to suffer far greater karma than others in this life. And third is largely in our control. So the Bhagavatam, from one perspective, is describing all these three together. And that's why some of us may feel my life is much more harder than this, and my life is not as bad as this. But the point is, we see this as a shock treatment to jolt us out of the idea that material life is okay. If I just do some good punya, as Rahugana was thinking, I'll be happy here. So the Bhagavatam's purpose is not renouncing the world. Why is simply renouncing the world? Because Rahugana itself is not described that he simply renounces the world and renounces kingdom and follows Jad Bharat. He becomes enlightened, it is said. So what is the idea over here? Although this pastime seems to be saying that material family life and materialistic life, material life itself is condemned, but we have Priyavrat pastime which says the opposite. Renunciation is not of much use unless you are engaged in you should be engaged responsibly, and that is what is more important. So these two pastimes are approaching from different perspectives. So for one who thinks that just renunciation alone is the solution, no. Responsible devotional engagement, that is the solution. That's what Priyavrat is told. And Rahugana also understands this extreme metaphor is given of the forest of material existence, but the solution is not simply renouncing the world. It is not sarva karma tyaga as sarva kama tyaga. And kama tyaga would mean, so kama tyaga means we need to give up our worldly desires. And the way to give up worldly desires is by cultivating devotional desires. So wherever we are, we try to increase our devotional absorption. We try to get responsible devotional engagements, and that's how we'll grow in our life. And then at the right time, if it is required, we can renounce the world. Or if it's not required, we may not do that also. But the important thing is, we will grow slowly but surely, start renouncing worldly desires. And once we make Krishna the center of our life, the purpose of our life, then all those three categories of distresses at least we won't be creating further karma by seeking other objects or sources of pleasure. We won't be creating further suffering in this life. Whatever suffering comes in our life inevitably because of past karma, Krishna will minimize it, and the inevitable distress of material existence we will be able to tolerate and transcend by devotional absorption. In this way, the Bhagavatam's essential message is not of renunciation, but of devotional absorption. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for the very beautiful class. Very clearly, you brought out the internal principles that we forget when we are externally following the rules and regulations. And the point that karma tyaga and kama tyaga is more important. So that's really helpful, Prabhuji. So we always tend to get into some following some instructions, some rules and regulations, some austerities, but we forget about the principle. Why we are doing that? We have to increase our devotion. So we should, from the mind, we should involve in our devotional service, not only mechanically. So that will help, really going to help us. Thank you. Thank you so much, Prabhuji.
Thank you. Happy to be of service. Thank you. So I see some questions here.
Yes, Prabhuji, we can.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. And so now, if our family is, say, wants to eat meat, then should we cook it for them? Should we let them eat it? Should we facilitate them in eating it? And this is not just pious activity, this is impious activity. So bhakti can go along with pious activity. Can it go along with impious activity? Yeah, that's a tough situation. My broad understanding is that we should not confuse the primary and secondary principles in bhakti. Now, what is the primary principle in bhakti? We can say that remembering Krishna, which centers on chanting the holy names. That is the primary principle in bhakti. So that is something which we shouldn't compromise on. Now, having said that, there are various other factors which also contribute to our bhakti. But how important are they? We have to learn to prioritize them. And when we learn to prioritize them, what does that mean? That means, say, if we consider say meat eating. Now, if our family is forcing us to eat meat, that is something serious. Maybe that's what we should try to avoid. And I don't think in today's world, that level of force is exerted. So I'll just share a diagram here, which I find quite helpful in explaining this. So if you consider here, say if this is our relationship with Krishna, so this should be our number one priority. Then there is our relationship with our family members. And third is their relationship with Krishna. Now, what happens is for most of us, when we start developing our relationship with Krishna, naturally, we want them also to develop their relationship with Krishna. So we want, as we are developing one, we want them to also, we want three also to develop. And this largely depends on that person's individual intention, individual motives, individual consciousness. So what happens is, sometimes we put a lot of pressure on them to develop three. So for example, chant the holy names, come to the temple, don't do this, don't do that. And when we put too much pressure on three and trying to force them to develop their relationship with Krishna, the result of that is the tension comes in two. Because in every relationship, there is some expectation from the other person and there is some contribution to that person. So I do something for you and you do something for me. The reciprocity is a basis of every relationship. But then what happens from the other person's perspective, they start feeling that we are expecting too much from them. No, this is what you don't want me to do this, and you want me to do this, and you want me to do that, and you are not doing anything for me. So then, when in any relationship, when the tensions start coming, when it starts, many reasons could be there, but broadly speaking, when one person feels that too much is being demanded from me and too little is being offered to me in return. So then what happens? When this becomes tense, and then the result of this is on one also. And if one means if there is constant fighting, either there are hot wars or cold wars, there is tension, there are harsh words exchange, even if there's coldness, then that creates a tension. And then even if we sit down to chant, we will not be able to chant very well. And we will find our mind distracted, disturbed. And so what is happening over here is that because we are trying to force the other person to develop 3, so that creates pressure in 2, and that creates problems with 1 also. So what we need to do is, ideally, if 1, 2, and 3 can develop together, that's wonderful. That's symbiotic. That means we practice bhakti, they practice bhakti, and then both of us are having similar values, similar purposes. So then our mutual relationship also becomes strong. So one ideal would be where 1, 3, and 2 all develop together. But if that is not happening, then we have to have the priorities clear. So we can basically, in that case, separate 1 and 2 and leave 3 to Krishna. If we try to invite the other person, suggest to the other person, we pressure them a little bit and nothing seems to be working, it seems to be backfiring, then just leave 3 to Krishna. No, it is not a statement of our impurity or our deficiency. We see Prabhupada's own wife. She was pious, but she didn't share his missionary spirit. She was by no means a bad person. But was it a deficiency in Prabhupada that none of his children also became very serious devotees? Prabhupada's inspiration has made millions of people devoted across the world. But it's every soul has free will, and we have to respect that. Even Krishna doesn't force people to turn to him against their will. So who are we? So just leave 3 to that person itself, and then see 1 and 2 as separate. What does that mean? That means we make sure that we have time for our Krishna bhakti and we have time for our family relationship. And in general, I have found in today's world, if we don't encroach on the other person, then they also won't encroach on us. They say, okay, you want to do your bhakti and you let me do what I want to do in my life. Then it's okay. That's not the best thing. Yes, that's not the best thing. But just because we can't have the best doesn't mean we have to go toward the worst. We can be somewhere intermediate. So it's possible to have a functional relationship at the level of 2 without creating pressure on 3. And in fact, if our bhakti practice can improve this 2, that means improve our relationship with the other person. You may say, how can it improve if I'm practicing bhakti and they are not? No, each of these relationships has their own expectations, responsibilities, roles. So if a person finds that, that my partner, my sibling, my parent, my child, after they started practicing bhakti, they have become a better partner, a better sibling, a better parent, a better child, then that will attract them. Okay, what is all this bhakti about? That means if we say maybe become a little more understanding, a little more patient, a little more forgiving, less eager to lash out or try to hold grudges, there are 100 ways in which we can actually improve this too, and not just the bhakti practices, but the virtues that develop by the practice of bhakti. Those virtues can help us to do this. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have to join others in all their worldly, anti-devotional, sense gratificatory activities. No, we can decide what we can do, what we can't do. But it's not that what shouldn't happen is that Krishna is here and the other person starts feeling this Krishna is here in between, like a bridge between the two of us. And because of your Krishna bhakti, you have become such a different person that I can't even relate with you now. That shouldn't happen. We need to recognize that this relationship is also important and we need to invest in that relationship. And we may say, but that other person is not practicing bhakti. Well, okay, but even that person is not acting that way without the knowledge of Krishna. That means Krishna has some plan. And maybe by doing our responsibilities in this relationship. That is the way Krishna wants us to grow. Humility, tolerance, all these things, how do we develop them? They are devotional qualities. How do we develop them? Sometimes it is by doing our roles in some difficult relationships. That's how we often grow. Now, I'm not talking about extreme situations where somebody is abusive or something like that, but I'm talking about some if people are not, the other person in the relationship is not practicing bhakti, that doesn't mean that that has to create a fissure, a complete breakage or a breakdown in the relationship. So if we treat 1 and 2 as different, and the strength that we get by 1, the strength that we get by practicing our bhakti, we use that to improve the 2. That means approach that relationship with greater humility, with greater tolerance, with greater service attitude, not compromising 1, but apart from 1, there are many other areas in which we could work together. And when they see that, that's when 3 will develop. So coming to the specific question of meat eating, I'm not sure what exactly would be practical in a particular situation, but that becomes such a big issue. If the other person wants to eat meat, that we don't have to stop that. Now, if they want us to cook it for them, well, that's something which we'll have to work out in the individual dynamic of the relationship. Sometimes we may say that, I'm really uncomfortable, I don't want to eat because of my bhakti practices. And if you want to eat, maybe you go out and eat or whatever. You can work out the practicalities, but that is not such a big issue. That overall, in today's world, meat eating is quite common in some ways, and a lot of people give up meat eating also as their own consciousness awakens. People are doing it even without having any spiritual consciousness because of, say, the vegan movement and other things. So if we make it a big issue right now, that may ruin the relationship. But if we do what it takes to maintain the relationship, who knows? The other person may themselves give up meat eating over a period of time. Okay, that's my answer to the question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for that very apt answer for that question. So we have 5 hand raises, Prabhuji. We can take the questions one by one if you have time.
Yes, sure.
Yes. Yeah, I request Gail Mataji to go ahead with the question. Or else Anuradha Devi Mataji.
Mataji, we have to unmute them, Mataji. Nobody can unmute themselves.
Okay. Okay. I have unmuted Gail Mataji. Can you please speak now? Yes, Hare Krishna. Or Tiffany Mataji, you can please go ahead.
Okay, Tiffany, I have unmuted you. Can you hear
Hare
me now?
Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Good. Okay, go ahead, Gail.
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, so Gail Mataji, can you hear Tiffany Mataji? You had asked a question yesterday. Let Tiffany
Oh,
Mataji
yes,
come back to you.
yes.
We'll come back to you later. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Thank you for the class. It was wonderful. And I mean, this verse is amazing. It's so beautiful. When Indulekha Mataji was reading it, I felt like celebrating. I was so happy for King Rahugana. My question, you kind of addressed it, but I was having a conversation about Bhagavad Gita 9:30 and abominable acts and yes. So my question is in regard to our karma and how, let's see, how can I explain this? So, many times I've heard in class that right away, as soon as we start practicing Krishna consciousness, as soon as we start practicing devotional service and chanting, that our karma, as you mentioned in class, is sometimes minimized, and we're basically, rather than being under the rule of karma, we're under the rule of Krishna, so to speak. And so we were kind of discussing how, when it comes to abominable acts, and we are, and for a devotee who is practicing, how does Krishna allow certain things to happen? I mean, in cases of things like, again, because it says abominable acts, does that mean, things like murder or, something really, really egregious? How does Krishna use our karma with something like that? Is that only under the guise of karma, or are those acts happening in addition to Krishna kind of overseeing our behaviors? I hope I explained that.
Okay.
I hope you understand what I mean.
Okay. If something horrible, it's not something horrible happens like murder or something, then is it due to karma, or is it Krishna overseeing it, or exactly how is it happening? So my understanding is this is not so much abominable, because if you consider 930, that is more of a devotee doing something terrible. Apichet duracharo. Your question is more of something terrible happening to a devotee. Am I right in understanding that? Are you talking about a devotee committing a crime like murder, or a devotee being subjected to something like that?
Actually, both, but yes, both.
Okay, let's then focus on the first part, that a devotee does something terrible. Yeah, so this tension between dharma and bhakti. Dharma, you could say, is broadly ethical living. And bhakti is devotion to the Lord. Now, ideally speaking, dharma and bhakti should go together. But if you look at the Mahabharata war, in the Mahabharata war, there were devotees, Vaishnavas on both sides. The Pandavas were great devotees. Bhishma was also a great devotee. And there were some others. Bhurishrava was a king. He was also a Vaishnava. On the other hand, Drupada, who was on the Pandava side, was in his family, Shiva was traditionally worshipped. So Drupada was a Shaivite. So we see the Mahabharata war was not exactly fought based on bhakti. It was not fought exactly between devotees and non-devotees. It was fought it was a dharma yuddha. It was not a bhakti yuddha. Dharma yuddha means that yes, Bhishma was a devotee, Bhurishrava was a Vaishnava, is also a devotee, but they had chosen the side of wrong, and therefore war was fought against them, and eventually they were killed. So the idea is that because now we can go into the transcendental aspect of Bhishma's actions, but let's put that aside for the time being and focus on the contextual analysis. So things can be analyzed in different ways in different situations. So if you want to learn some wisdom for practical conduct, then we need to focus on the practical, historical, sociological kind of issues. So Mahabharata war was a dharma yuddha, and it was fought on principles of dharma. It was not exactly a bhakti yuddha. It was not fought necessarily between devotees on one side and non-devotees on the other side. So why is this point important? That when Bhishma fought against the Pandavas, so what happened? Eventually, he was killed. He didn't die immediately because he had Ichha Mrityu. So there are two dynamics over here. So Krishna didn't forget Bhishma's bhakti just because he had fought on the side of adharma. But at the same time, you could say Krishna didn't overlook Bhishma's fighting on the side of adharma just because he was a bhakta. So he was a bhakta, yeah, he was a great bhakta, not just a bhakta, a great bhakta. But still, that does not mean, oh, you are a devotee, so you can get away with all this. He was the commander of the opposing army and he had to be brought down. So this is where what happens is the Mahabharata war, it talks about dharma and it talks about bhakti both. So Krishna reconciled both. How did he reconcile both? At one level, you could say at a public level. So you could say publicly means publicly in the war, he was brought down for taking the side of dharma. But in one sense, it's not exactly privately, but you could say privately after the war. He was abundantly rewarded for his bhakti. How was he abundantly rewarded? Krishna himself came before him. And not only was Krishna there for him before he died, before he disappeared from the world, but Krishna also heard from him. And Yudhishthira also heard from him. So the principle over here is that if some devotee has done something terribly wrong, then does that mean because they are devotees, so the terrible wrongs are to be completely forgotten and overlooked and whitewashed? Not necessarily. Or does that mean that because they've done so terribly wrong, so their devotion has to be forgotten? No, not necessarily. So if, say, for example, some devotee in a particular position has abused their position and abused their power, and if a devotee does something, you could say not just immoral, but also illegal. There's a difference between the two. And not just immoral, but also illegal. Then what happens over here? Now, again, what is considered illegal in different countries may be different. But here I'm just simply talking about illegal means it's a very serious crime. So immoral means sometimes, as we say, as devotees should talk gently with each other. They should not yell at each other. And if a devotee scream and yell and use foul words, you'll be shocked. But that's not illegal, but that's inappropriate for a devotee. But on the other hand, if a devotee, say, embezzles money or does some criminal activities or does maybe something like domestic violence or child abuse or some sexual offense, now these are all terrible things. We won't want to talk about it. But the reality of the world is these things can happen. That may happen because some devotee has some baggage from the past life, or maybe they just get so much unchallenged power that the temptation to abuse that power comes up and there are no checks and balances, so they misuse the power. So when this happens, then we need to follow what Krishna does in the case of the Mahabharata. We're not saying that devotees like Bhishma, but even for Bhishma, so publicly, they need to be given appropriate consequences for their actions. So if somebody has done something publicly, means institutionally, maybe they're told don't come to our temples or whatever, that is publicly, and privately they can be encouraged and even facilitated as much as possible. Facilitated in practicing bhakti if they want to. We can't force them to, but we can facilitate them at an individual level. So this is the twofold dynamic. At one level, if somebody has abused power, then institutionally there had to be consequences. But those consequences shouldn't mean that they are deprived of the practice of bhakti. They can be deprived of positions of influence over others, because of their track record or whatever, at least for some time. So in this way, we separate between the two. And this not being able to separate between the immoral and the illegal, that can lead to a lot of problems. Sometimes a devotee should be forgiving. Okay, you can be forgiving. We can be forgiving toward the victimizer. But what about the victim of that wrongdoing? What are we not going to consider them also? Is it fair to, if they have suffered terribly, is it reasonable to expect them that let your abuser go scot-free and you just live with it? What if they do the same thing again? How do we really know that they have changed their heart? So in the Catholic Church, many of you know, probably there have been huge amounts of child abuse. And now there could be many things. We don't want to blame I don't want to blame the Catholic Church over here. But one of the major issues of debate over there was, say, if child sexual abuse was there. Within the church itself, there was this debate, is this a sin to be forgiven by the church, or is it a crime to be persecuted by the state, prosecuted rather? Is it a crime because their idea is that, at least the Catholic Church, you go before the priest and you confess your sins and you'll be forgiven. So is this a sin in that category, or is it a crime? So initially their attitude was, this is a sin, and because it's a sin, it can be forgiven. But now they're recognizing this cannot simply be called as a sin which we have the right to forgive. Rather, it is a crime against society at large, and again, in fact, against some of the most defenseless members of society, and therefore it has to be punished. It has to be prosecuted by the state. So now we could always say that they covered it up because they wanted to maintain their prestige and other things. That is also possible, but there is also a theological confusion over there. So so as devotees, if somebody has done something illegal, then covering it up is not forgiveness, or covering it is not necessarily exhibiting a devotional, compassionate behavior. Because compassion is there, that's one aspect, but also justice is also another aspect. And there is a tension between these two. There could be a tension with justice and law and order on one side, and compassion and forgiveness on the other side. So how they are to be balanced, that has to be very carefully done. But at the very least, we can say is that the forgiveness should not mean that the person is again put in the position where they can abuse the power and do the same things which they had done in the past. This is a whole big subject, the tension between justice and mercy, or justice and forgiveness. If you go on my website, The Spiritual Scientist, I had done a 3-part series in London on this topic, the tension between justice and forgiveness. You can find more about that over there. Okay, but does this answer this question briefly at least?
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you so much for your answer. You cleared up many things for me, and I truly appreciate it. And again, the class was wonderful. I'm glad, and it's wonderful to have you 2 days in a row. So, Hare Krishna.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your
Thank you for your thoughtful question. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Yes, is this Sukha Prabhu or Sukha Mataji? It's difficult to know from the name.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. This is a woman's body, this Janma. So thank you so much, Prabhu, for a beautiful class, as always, Prabhuji. I really appreciate. I just have two, I don't know if you would call them silly questions, but I mean, I was listening to how you were nicely detailing why renunciation would not be the best way to go. And so engage in activities, Krishna conscious activities, so not give up karma altogether. So I just would like to know from you, in short, Prabhu, is there a definitive answer? I mean, what would be a definitive answer to say that why, renunciation is, because in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna actually, he says that both are, good in one sense. So, but then he says to work in Krishna consciousness is better. So is there a short answer to that, Prabhuji? And I have another question too. The other question.
Okay, let me complete this first. So let me re-articulate the question to see if I understood what you're saying. Are you saying that is devotion above karma? Is that your question? Is essence? Hare Krishna. Okay. Was your question is Sukha Mataji? Is the question that is devotion above karma? Essentially. Okay, I have asked.
So sorry, Prabhuji, she is not able to unmute. Just give me a second.
Okay.
Yes,
now
Prabhu,
you can speak. Yeah, now you can speak.
Yeah, sorry, Mataji. Please don't mute me until the question is complete. If you can, please. Yeah. I don't want to create confusion, sorry.
No.
Yes, Prabhuji, my question was, you explained so beautifully what, why acting in Krishna consciousness is better than renunciation altogether. I was just looking for a short answer, Prabhuji. I mean, like, at length we can give so many points, like,
it's so much about karma. You're talking about, so why is acting in Krishna consciousness superior to renouncing the world? Is that the question in a sense then? A short answer to that.
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay, so two things.
I will mute myself.
So renouncing the world is a means. It's not the end. It's Krishna talks about it is naiva tyaga phalam labhet. So tyaga is not the goal. Tyaga is the means. And what is the goal? The goal is ultimately to attain liberation, to ultimately attain love for Krishna. So unless we recognize that ultimate purpose, we can't move forward. Now, can renunciation help in that? Yes, possibly. But Arjuna, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna's expectation was that I just renounce the world, I'll become free from our karmic entanglement. Krishna says, no, you still have your mind, you still have the Kshatriya disposition, and you will not be able to sustain renunciation. So the idea is that each of us has to evolve naturally. So renunciation itself doesn't necessarily lead to liberation. One has to actually become detached from the world, and renunciation can be a step in that detachment. But will it be a suitable step for everyone? Sometimes for some people, renunciation itself may create so much tension, so much agitation, so much anxiety that will make it difficult to renounce the world. That is difficult to stay, rather it will be difficult to maintain one's peace of mind and balance. So, na karmana manarambhan naishkarmyam purushoshnute nacha sanyasanadeva siddhim samadhi gacchati. 3.4 in the Bhagavad Krishna says, na karmanam anarambhan naishkarmyam purushoshnute. So naishkarmya refers to freedom from the reactions of karma. So Krishna is telling Arjuna that
I'm not able to hear Prabhuji. I don't know if it is my problem.
Even we cannot, Mataji. Not sure what's happened. I think Prabhuji started screen share. Yeah, it's frozen.
Why is this? Because ultimately we all have to play some roles in society. And if we don't play the roles responsibly, then we are not, even sannyasis have their roles. Even renunciation from the world also, there are certain responsibilities expected of a person in the renounced order. If they're not playing their roles, then that is going to lead to problems in its own way. So the important thing is we need to play our particular roles. Say, na karmana manarambha naishkarmyam purushoshteme, say that if the police see a particular crime happening and the police do nothing, then they will still be held culpable. Why? You say, I didn't do anything. Well, by not doing anything, that itself is a problem. You are expected to do something. That's why there are there's a category called crimes of omission. Crimes of omission means that somebody, by not doing their duty, they're committing a crime. So freedom from karma or freedom from karmic entanglement is not as simple as simply giving up one's duty or giving up one's activity. One has to actually develop the mentality of service. So it's not so much what causes entanglement is not the activity, but the mentality with which we are doing that activity. And when that mentality is filled with the mood of service, Krishna, you are my Lord, I am your servant. And whether it is in the family, in the Grahastha ashram or in the sannyas ashram, whether it is this profession or that profession, if we have that attitude of service, then the more that service attitude comes in, the more that attitude of selflessness comes in, at the very least. Even if somebody is not really understanding Krishna as the ultimate reality, but the selfless attitude that comes in, that is what will lead to purification and liberation. So renunciation, if it is not accompanied by that service attitude, not accompanied by that selflessness, then the renunciation can itself also be entangling. So that's why acting in Krishna consciousness means wherever I am right now, I try to bring in that seva bhav as much as I can. And that's how one will grow organically. And overall, in the renounced order, it is very difficult to sustain that for most people. So it's not sustainable. Then a person may fall to wrongdoing after that, and that may create further problems. So that's why it's both from both perspectives, that renunciation alone doesn't guarantee selflessness or service attitude. And if the service attitude self is not there, renunciation can also lead to activity that may contaminate and entangle. For two brief reasons why we need to focus more on developing detachment where we are than on renouncing the world. So yeah, yes, Tiffany Mataji, that is a 3-part series which you found that over there, balancing forgiveness and justice. And there's this question about if we are cooking non-veg for someone else, are we also doing karma? Well, to some extent, by cooking non-veg, are we doing karma? Are we creating fresh karma? Well, my understanding, and different devotees may have different opinions in this, my understanding is, as devotees, we need to focus more on being Krishna conscious than karma conscious. Karma conscious means, yes, about getting karmic reactions. Well, there are so many things that can give karmic reactions. Just when we live in cities, almost so many things that we use, that we use as routine products. There is so much terrible karma involved in that. So in making those things, in the propagation of those things. So in one sense, it's very difficult to always stay free from karma. So we should focus more on developing our relationship with Krishna and helping others developing relationship with Krishna. So certainly cooking vegetarian food and offering to Krishna is far better than cooking non-vegetarian food. So yes, we cannot offer the food to Krishna when we are cooking non-vegetarian food. That's true. But still you can internally do it in a service attitude. Krishna, somehow I'm in this situation where this is what I need to do. What can I do about it? So bhakti is so inclusive that it can include practically anything and everything. In the first canto, in the 9th chapter, not in the 9th chapter, 10th, 11th chapters, there's a description when Krishna enters into Dwarka. At that time, there's described there are many prostitutes in Dwarka are there. And Prabhupada writes in the purport that there is no problem in a prostitute if one is a devotee of Krishna. We say, so how can if somebody is a devotee, how can they be a prostitute? If they are a prostitute, how can they be a devotee? That's of course a provocative and extreme example. But the point is, sometimes situationally, circumstantially, somebody might be in a situation where there is just no option. So one shouldn't stop bhakti because of that. And is there going to be karma in that situation? Well, in one sense, karma is there in everything. And we have to understand ultimately, karma is not like a mysterious infectious disease that is out to grab us. Karma is ultimately meant for justice and accountability. So it's a principle of justice. And Krishna is an understanding God who oversees karma. So if somebody has a duty to a family duty or family responsibility to cook something, well, if we are not doing it for our own pleasure in terms of gratifying our senses, then Krishna is not going to, I'm not saying there'll be no karma in it, but Krishna is an understanding God, and Krishna will see, and maybe if we try to serve sincerely, Krishna will free us from that situation. Again, as extreme example, when Bhaktisiddhanta Swami Thakur hosted officials of the British government in his temple in Mayapur, at that time he told that these people are addicted to eating meat, so cook meat and offer to them. Now it's Now, there are different devotees who have different accounts, whether it is the temple devotees who cooked them or whether they had some other people come and cook them. The idea was that people who came to meet Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, British officers at that time, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur offered meat to them. Why? Because that's what they expected. They were habituated to. At that time, vegan food was not as cool as it is now. So Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur even went to that extreme. So that's why I don't think we should worry so much about karma. We should focus more on bhakti and on Krishna and how best we can serve Krishna in that situation. If we start becoming karma conscious everywhere, that can actually interfere with our normal human relationship with someone. So if somebody is doing something which we know is bad karma, well, what are we going to do? Can we actually force them to not do it? Are we going to just break the relationship because they're not listening to us? No. We have to continue the relationship at some level, and we have to try to, maybe, yes, they are doing a bad karma, but maybe we are their only way out of bad karma. And if our spiritual masters, if our gurus were very karma conscious, then they would not even give us initiation, because technically in the sense of initiation, our karma goes to them. So if Prabhupada had been karma conscious, he would have said that actually Vrindavan is a much more safe place for me to live than go to New York and meet all materialistic people over there and get contaminated by their association. So my understanding is, as devotees, we have to be more Krishna conscious. That means, what does Krishna consciousness means? That how can I best serve Krishna in this situation? How can I help this person come closer to Krishna in this situation? So if we understand that, then we will be able to move forward in our life and work in that relationship in a way that there is a way to maintain that relationship without either breaking that relationship or completely giving up our Krishna consciousness because of that. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavad Pranam. Can you take Gail Mataji's questions? Because she is waiting from long.
Sure.
I have a question too.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Param Devki Mataji, can you wait for a few minutes, please?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much, Prabhu and Mataji. Yeah, my question had to do was referring to your section on absorption. So you were saying that that's the best thing, to whatever we're doing in Krishna consciousness, to be absorbed in that. So I had two questions in connection with this absorption. One is, let's say a person feels that they can be more absorbed in reading than in doing japa. They find themselves so distracted by japa, but they find themselves totally absorbed by reading. So is the reading therefore not better? And then the other question in connection with this absorption, you were saying that, even brahmacharis, they're not able to do sadhana, the items of sadhana all day long. And so in such a case, then after sadhana, then what? How to stay in Krishna consciousness if you cannot do those items all day long. So these were my questions.
Yeah, so that's why even second part, when brahmachari life, there are various other services. Prabhupada created book distribution. There are festivals, there are temples to be managed. There are so many services to be done. So Prabhupada, in fact, says in one of his Nectar of Devotion lectures that I have practically invented this Krishna consciousness movement. Now, another place he said that I have done nothing different from my spiritual master. I haven't changed one word. But in Prabhupada, I have practically invented. So he gives a purport over there. What he, in the class itself, he says, what he means is that I have practically, Prabhupada says that it is the spiritual master's responsibility to find out ways and means to help the student to fix their mind on Krishna. So in one sense, the the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is saying, always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. Somehow or other, fix the mind in Krishna. But how to fix the mind in Krishna? So that is the spiritual master's responsibility, to come up with means to help us fix the mind in Krishna. So I would say during the pandemic, while there's been a pandemic, there is a Zoom explosion. And this is a way we have all found ways to fix our mind in Krishna, by speaking about Krishna digitally, by hearing about Krishna digitally. So we have to be resourceful. So even in the Brahmacharya ashram or Grahastha ashram, it is, we all have to find the ways in which we can best absorb our mind in Krishna. And as far as hearing or chanting, yes, there are certain prescribed activities which we are all expected to do, and we need to do them. So there is a prescribed sadhana that we do. But apart from that, say now Kartik is starting. So if some of us feel that, yeah, I want to do some extra bhakti in Kartik, then we can decide what we should do. If we feel inspired to do, there's a particular activity that we feel naturally inspired to do, then do that. We don't have to do other things. So if we find reading or hearing more absorbing, then that's what we can do extra. So the basic sadhana we all do, but apart from that, the extra that we have to do, that we can choose according to what we feel naturally absorbed in. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you, Mataji. Yes, Param Devaki Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Dandavat Pranam.
Yes.
Prabhu, I have a question from yesterday's class.
Okay.
My question is that you said that 8 components, 8 elements are Bhumi, Vayu,
Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. Yeah.
and Ahankar is one
Ahankar.
of them.
Yes, correct.
Ahankar. My question is that why Ahankar? Ego. Why ego is added? Because we use Ahankar in a derogatory manner.
Okay.
And I cannot distinguish when to use ego and when to use false ego.
Okay. So why is ego one of the elements among the 8 elements, when we usually use ego in a derogatory sense? And how do we differentiate between ego and false ego? Yeah.
Yes.
That's what I was trying to explain in yesterday's class, that the word ego has 2 different aspects. That there is a functional aspect. There is a mechanism by which the soul connects with the matter, with the gross body and the subtle body. And in that mechanism, the ego is a vital functional component. So just as the earth is a functional component, the water is a functional component in our body. As I mentioned, if the water is not there, inadequate water is there, then circulation doesn't happen. So many bodily functions are not possible. That's why sometimes people who drink less water, they get kidney stone and other things. They're told drink more water. So each of these elements plays a role. Now, because some of the elements are gross, so we can understand, if I don't drink water, there'll be certain problems at a physiological level in my body. Now, the subtler elements, the problems that they cause, the roles that they play, they may be a little more difficult to understand because these elements themselves are subtler. But one way to understand it is that we all, when we get a particular body and we are going to function in a particular way in the world, we need a functional sense of identity. Without that functional sense of identity, we will not be able to play that role. We'll not even be able to survive. If, say, for example, there is a young mother who has a newborn baby, and if the young mother does not feel any affection for her child, the baby will not only cry and suffer, but the baby will not even be able to survive without the care of the mother. So now what creates that sense of identification within that soul, that I am a mother? So that is the ego. So is that identification bad? Not necessarily. When that becomes our sole identity, that is when it is a problem. It is important for each one of us to recognize that our identity also exists at multiple levels. What do I mean by multiple levels? That a fundamental or foundational identity is that we are souls who are parts of Krishna. But along with that, each one of us is also having some functional identities in this world. And those functional identities are also important. If we don't recognize the importance of those functional identities, that itself will create a problem. Now, what could be the problem because of that? Let's look at this. In the Bhagavad Gita, in 2:13, Krishna tells Arjuna that, in roughly paraphrasing that verses, that you are not the body, you are the soul. Actually, as far as I have seen, there is no direct statement in the scripture which says you are not the body. What it says is that to think you are the body is an illusion. It doesn't say you are not the body. Prabhupada makes like an extrapolation of that, and it's a very valid extrapolation. And it's a provocative way of putting it for our understanding. But the point I'm making here is, this is the famous verse which we roughly translate as, you are not the body or the soul. And the soul is going through changing bodies. So in this verse, Krishna has told Arjuna, you are not the body. Roughly speaking, paraphrasing it. But in the very next verse, what is he saying? Matra sparshastu kaunteya. If Arjuna is not the body, then it is the body which is the daughter of Kunti. Why is Krishna immediately using the Kaunteya name to refer to him? Or for that reason, Bharata. Bharata is a descendant in the dynasty of King Bharat. So who is descendant? The soul is not a descendant. The soul is transcendental. Why is he using this reference? Because the functional identity is also important. And Prabhupada explains in the purport that because he's the son of a glorious mother, because he is a scion is a descendant in a great dynasty, therefore that brings responsibilities for him. And that responsibility means he has to do his duty even when it is difficult. So therefore, he has to act on the spiritual platform. So the point I'm making is that there is a functional identity which is required for functioning in the world. Without that, we cannot function. Say, if I am based in India and I come to America, now I may coming to America to tell people that, I think I mentioned this yesterday also, if I'm coming to America to tell that one part of that we are not our bodies, we are souls. But at the American immigration, if they ask me which country I am from, I cannot say I'm a soul, I'm transcendental. I have to say that I'm an Indian, I have this Indian passport. So there is a functional identity which is important for us. The problem is when the functional identity becomes our complete identity. So are we mothers? Are we, say, Indians or Americans? Are we young or middle-aged, or are we males or females? Yes, we are those, but we are not only those things. Our identity extends beyond those. So to reduce our identity to our current body and our bodily role, that is a problem. But if we completely reject that, we won't be able to function at all. So what the ego does is, the ego creates that sense of connection between us and our functional identity. And that connection is required for us to function. But the problem is when that becomes our only connection, or that becomes our only identity, then that is illusion. So false ego means that our ego leads us to falsity. What is the falsity? To think that I am nothing, there's nothing to me more than the body. That this kind of obsession can happen to anything in any area. So say, for example, somebody thinks that they're a sports player, somebody is a cricketer, or somebody is a musician, and they become obsessed with it. They become so obsessed with it that they neglect the fact that they neglect their health, they neglect their family, they neglect their friends. And so reducing our identity to our one role alone, that is what is false ego. So when our ego is a functional element within our psychophysical makeup, within the mechanism that links the body with soul with matter. So in that sense, it's essential. But when that ego leads us to illusion, then ego leads us to thinking that our functional identity is our soul identity, that is when we become entangled. That is when we become deluded. So that's why the word ego, there is a philosophical meaning, or as I talked about technical meaning yesterday, functional meaning, and then there is a more of a relational or psychological meaning. So we have to see. So when you use the word ego in a derogatory sense, this person has a lot of ego, then we are not using it exactly in the sense that the ahankar element within them is very large. We are saying that person is too full of themselves. That person is too arrogant, too self-centered, too self-obsessed. So we have to see in which sense the word is being used. Say, consider the word energy. A scientist is doing experiment in the laboratory, and then the scientist says that they tell their assistant, I run out of energy. Now, what does that mean? I have no energy left. What does that mean? That means maybe they're using a battery for the experiment and the battery is discharged. Something like that. It's a technical meaning. But that same scientist comes back home and they tell their spouse, I have no energy left. Now the spouse is now, okay, should I where is your battery? Should I charge it? No, they're using the energy in the sense of physical energy. So the word same energy is there, but it has two different senses. So similarly, ahankar as a functional element is what creates the sense of connection or identification with our functional identities in the world. And that is essential for our functioning. But when we use the word ego in the sense of it's a very egoistic person, what we mean by that is that person is too full of themselves. So it's a different meaning of the word. Now, is the meaning and the element related? Yes. When a person's sense of ego is very inflated, then they start thinking that their role is the most important role in the world, and then they become very full of themselves. So that is when it's a problem. So it's a little technical. I tried to explain it as well as I could. But if you again go on my website, geetadaily.com, and just search for ego over there, you'll find an article which explains these two concepts of the word ego. Or you can search for the article on, there are in geetadaily.com, there are articles on almost each verse of the Gita. There are about 4,000 articles on the Gita. So if you go to 7.4 and search for articles on 7.4 in the Gita, there are also this concept of ego in the two senses, functional and behavioral, that they are explained. Okay.
Prabhu,
So thank you very much.
Prabhu, but
Yeah.
I want to know one thing more. They say, I mean, it is in Gita also, that ego, intelligence and mind are the carriers of the soul when you leave
Correct.
the body. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
And if it is so, then is it the false ego or it is the ego which is traveling? And if it
It's the
is
ego.
false ego,
So there is no such thing as false ego, which is an element.
true.
So
True,
the
but
only
you
element
also
is
said
no. So let me complete. I understood your question. When you say the ego, the mind, and the intelligence go with the soul to the next body, what is going? It's the ego which is going. So false is the conception present within the ego. Okay, how do I explain
I have not
this?
understood, Prabhu.
Yeah, and I understood that you are not understood because I haven't explained it clearly. Let's put it this way, that if you use the word memory in terms of a computer, now memory, we can use the word it can refer to a memory stick. Maybe I have a 8 GB pen drive, or I have a 512 GB RAM, or hard drive memory in my computer, central memory. So we use the word memory to refer to the hardware, the physical content of the memory.
Yes.
And we also use the word memory. So my memory is full. What does it mean? That means the hardware structure that is there, that is filled with data, and in that sense it is full. So now if I have say 8 GB pen drive and I take it out now, and it's full of data. So is the 8 GB pen drive that is blank and 8 GB pen drive that is full? Are they the same? No, one is full, one is empty. But if I say it's full, is it that the 8 GB pen drive which is full of data is going to weigh much more than this? No, that data is subtle. It's not, there's no weight component over there. So I can use the word memory to refer to the physical component which is going to contain the data. And we can use the word memory to refer to the data that is contained in the physical component also. Is this clear?
Yes.
So similarly, ego can refer to the memory chip, the pen drive, and ego can refer to the conceptions that are present, the memory that is present in the pen drive, like that, the conceptions that are present in that element. So ego can refer to both these things, the element like the pen drive or the data in the pen drive, that is the conceptions that are present in the ego. So all of us have different conceptions present in the ego. Say, I am a brahmachari. So my ego's conception is, I am a brahmachari. So you are a female. So your ego conception is that you're a female. We all have our ego conceptions. Now, I may be from a particular part of the world, a particular part of India. You may be from another part of the world, another part of India, whatever. So there is the ego as a functional element, and there are the contents within that ego. So when we say false ego, so the ego is the content. It's like the pen drive. If the pen drive contains my data, then even if I go from one computer to another computer, the data is going to go from this computer. The physical pen drive will go. But now the pen drive may contain good data. The pen drive may contain a virus. So if my pen drive is filled with virus, I take it from one computer to another computer, it will contaminate that computer also. So so when the conceptions present within the ego as the element, the conceptions within that present within that ego, they breed illusion. That is when we call it as false ego. So when that ego is filled with conceptions that I am only this particular body, or I am the best person in this world, and everybody needs to listen to me. When those kind of conceptions are present, that is when it is false ego. That is when it is reproached and is told we should give up our ego. But we never give up the ego. So that's like saying, your pen drive has a lot of bad data, so clean it now. Clean it. Maybe sometimes you have to format it also. Sometimes you just put it in a computer which has a good antivirus, and then it cleanses out all the unwanted files, the dangerous files. And when we want to become purified, it's not we destroy the ego element. We get rid of conceptions that are breeding falsity and illusion within us. That's what is the meaning of becoming humble or becoming purified. Does it answer your question now?
Prabhu, where to use ego and where to use false ego? I get always confused. I'm not sure I should be writing false ego or I should be writing ego. So I asked somebody, they said, no, dono ek hi hai. They are same. I didn't agree because
no, they are not false. Same. When should you use false ego? My suggestion would be don't get into technicality at all. It's a technical differentiation. But if at all you have to write a differentiation, so wherever the ego is having an unhealthy effect on the person, that is when you can use the word false ego. When it is not having an unhealthy effect, then there's no need to use the word false over there. But because the word is so complicated, if you just tell a person you have got an ego, big ego, they will be offended by that. Now, if you tell the person you got a big false ego, now if they don't know the philosophical, they won't even know what it means. So you could just present it in a different, instead of getting into that terminology, you could be a little more gentle, a little more diplomatic, and say that when you speak in this way, people may perceive it in a way that is not conducive. Say what? People may think that you are arrogant, you are too full of yourself. So because the word ego has its own negative connotations, so it's best to I would say, since this technicality is confusing you, so don't get into that technicality. You could use words like ahankar can also be translated as arrogance. So better you can use the word arrogance instead of ego. And that's very clear. So when are you going to, we are not going to say that arrogance is a functional element for the soul to connect with the body. So you could use ego in the sense only of the functional element that is essential for the soul to connect with the body. And for the other behavioral, undesirable behavioral aspect which results, you can just use the word arrogance over there. And that way you can differentiate.
And the one that travels along with the soul is ego only.
Ego, yes. It's like the pen drive which goes from there.
Yes,
now what the pen drive contains, that's different. For some people, the pen drive may contain data like virus, which is harmful. For some people, it may contain data which is good. But it's the pen drive that travels.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Prabhu. I was really confused because the more I ask this question to others, they give me different types of replies. So which confused me thoroughly.
Yeah, I understand. It's a technical question, and it is easy to get confused about it. I hope that things were
thank
clear
you so
for
much. I'm quite clear. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you very much. Happy to be of service. I think we had a very long session. So Utkarsh Prabhu, maybe in the next session you can ask your question. Or you can visit the spiritualscientist.com. There are many question answers over there. There are more than 8,000 questions which have been answered on the spiritualscientist.com. If you check your answers, search for some answers, you may find it there also. Okay. Gantra, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Today, you gave so much time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, I want to thank
Prabhu.
Thank all of you for the opportunity for the service, and it's wonderful to see you having these classes for years going on steadily, and I'm happy that I can be of some service. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Dhanyavad.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for a wonderful class.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Very valuable class, Prabhuji.
Pranam Krishna.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Radhe Radhe.
Hare Krishna.